Right. Thank you, Grisha, for your presentation. So for the audience, if you have any questions, could you please raise your hand and then I'll just call on you in the order in which you appear on my screen, which may be different from the order in which you appear on your screen. But okay, so the first hand I see is Casper.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot. This is really cool. And so maybe a couple of things. The first thing is I noticed that I did something really rather similar, and I think we should have a chat maybe independently at some point, because I think that this ranking measure could also be used directly to account for these what I call scale shifts. So we might want to have a chat separately. But more to the point here, I have two concerns / comments. And the first concern perhaps is that you've set this up as kind of, we have three things. We have a reporting function, we have preferences, and we have states of the world. And I just want to push back a little bit on the idea that it's preferences that determine the response, together with states of the world and the reporting function, but rather that it's the mental states or the attitudes or the feelings of the respondents that then determine the response. Maybe that's just like me talking and an economist talking, but it seems that there is some substantive difference between talking here about preferences and what people feel like. And it seems to me that it's the feelings that determine the response, not the sort of abstract preferences that persons might have. And then the second one was on the adaptation results, because if I understood it correctly, it's essentially both in the ranking. No, in the ranking measure, it's just people saying, "Oh, it's better or worse." But in the level measure, it's essentially taking the difference in what people responded. I'm a 7, and then in the next year, say they said a 9, and then you take the sign whether it's positive or negative. And your adaptation results essentially said that it must go. So if it's positive, well, for the contemporaneous one, it goes up. And then if it's negative for the lagged one, it must go down. Is that correct?
Well, of course, we don't say it must, but that's
no, it doesn't have to.
What on average it does
go down. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I wonder if that maps onto the standard view of what adaptation is, which is a change in the level, but I think it is. So maybe forget about that question, but okay. The first one still stands.
Yeah, I think the first one, of course, is a good one, and it's very hard to answer because I don't know. And my guess is that there's kind of a split answer. The first one is that some of what you label feelings, I would label preferences, but it doesn't mean that it's exactly the same thing. My guess is that the the degree to which your preferences are met by your current life conditions, so what you consume, what the government provides, and all those things, that they affect via your preferences, your feelings in a systematic way. If that's the case, I think I'm fine. And then, of course, there are other things that affect your feelings. And then it depends on whether those things are correlated with the things I observe in a systematic way that is not via preferences. If that would be true, I'm in trouble because I would measure maybe the wrong thing. But then the question is the concept of preferences or feelings really that much different? But if feelings is just something that is not related to, for example, the level of infrastructure or healthcare service or environmental quality that the government provides, then most likely it's just noise for my interpretation. And I can deal with that. So noise is not a problem. Only systematic deviations would be a problem.
Thank you. Yeah, cheers.
Okay, great. So next is Katja.
Hi. Thank you, Grisha. That's super interesting. I just wanted to clarify a bit the comparison between the rank measure and the level measure. So you say that the level measure is bound, discrete, and like all the things we know, it suffers from the reporting function potential issues. And you say that you can mitigate that, but as far as I understand, you also ask the respondents on some bounded scale from, say, very much less to much more, which would be, say,
Yeah.
-3 + 3. And in a sense, it is also discrete and bound, right? And also, to an extent, they can also, different people might differently understand what is stayed the same and got slightly better. So there would be also some kind of thresholds to cross. And wouldn't that be the same type of issue to compare people? Last year, I thought that beta is something different from what I think beta is this year. So to an extent, yeah, I understand how you capture a slightly different concept, but it's not exactly clear how it doesn't have the same issues as the previous concept had.
So thanks. So at an abstract level, you're absolutely right. I still think it makes a difference. So the ranking measure on just as a scale, yes, you're right, it's bound. But if you compare, if you observe the same person or even several generations over a number of decades, let's say, with the level measure, yes, you can only measure levels. So there are at least 10 times it can improve. So if you have 30 years of data, you can't have an improvement each and every year. That's impossible by construction. Even if that person actually feels happier, more satisfied, whatever, each and every year. With the ranking measure, you can deal with that. So it's possible to observe an infinite number of improvements or deteriorations. So in that sense, so intertemporally, it's not bound. And of course, I as soon as I start to interpret the size of how much better, then I run into the same issues. So we only use the sign. The other thing is in terms of the interpretation of what does it mean to be better. Well, I guess the basic idea of better and worse is, well, at least more commonly shared of what a 7 means on a scale of 1 to 10. But yes, I still have the issue of thresholds, and if they are systematic, if they are heterogeneous across the population and systematically so with some of my variables of interest, yes, I'm in trouble. And at the moment, I can't rule that out, but I think the chances of that being the case to a relevant extent are smaller than with the level measure. But yes, I think it's an improvement. It's not 100% clear as the equations might suggest.
I see, thank you. And maybe there's a quick follow-up, since I might have had my hand still risen. When you were asking people in your experiment, maybe you were asking them some additional questions about what do they exactly mean by that, or something that could direct you towards how they, why they report better or not, or that was not the point.
So it depended. So we never explicitly asked, what do you mean by that? In one version of the survey, we also asked the ranking measure for several subdomains. But we haven't, well, I have nothing, Sonja has, really analyzed that data. And in the British household panel survey, that was essentially already over by the time we discovered the data. And the small experiment we only had an open-ended question. And yeah, essentially, as I said yesterday, people were really enthusiastic that that someone cared about how they felt. They really loved that. And it was also it was 2015, I think. So there was a lot of things about refugees in Germany, and it was an extremely impressive snapshot of public opinion. But yeah, so we picked out some worries that to some extent are public good, that are behind what we were observing. Yes, but it was not really trying to get methodologically at what it is that drives these things.
Thank you.
Okay, so next is Mark.
Yes, okay, thank you. Yeah, so it's very nice to ask a question about how people assess their change for their own situation. One of the uses of standard subjective well-being measures is interpersonal comparisons. Have you thought of designing a question like that for interpersonal purposes, like asking people if they feel they are better off than their parents or than their neighbor or something like that? Would there be the equivalent of what you are doing here for interpersonal issues?
I think I haven't thought about it, but it's certainly an interesting thought. So yes, we asked them to compare them with themselves, but yes, kind of based on their own kind of current, well, we say preferences, we actually prefer how you are now than you are today. And we could ask them, given what's important to you, would you rather have the life of your neighbor or of your dad or of your mom or something like that? And I think that's an interesting approach. I see one caveat, and that is, of course, they've never walked in the shoes of the other person.
Sure.
Whereas they have, of course, maybe with some recollection bias, but they have walked in their own shoes a year ago. But otherwise, I think it's certainly an interesting kind of angle that one could explore, but we haven't done it.
Okay, so next is Mark Fabian.
Thanks. Great presentation. Just a really short question, which is, I was curious how much the discrepancy in the levels between time 1 and time 2 is driven by people answering 7s and 8s kind of almost at random. Like I sometimes worry that those two numbers basically mean the same thing in these 1 to 10 scales. I'm kind of curious what Chris has to say about that, because he's looked at these focal biases. So yeah, how much was that discrepancy just around 7 and 8, or was it kind of more widespread than that?
To be honest, I don't remember, but it's worth checking. So yeah, good question, but I don't know the answer. But there is an answer.
Okay, so next is Ori.
Hi, so thanks for the presentation. I am staring at the slide that you're showing now, and the subscripts imply a very specific underlying theory, specifically the reporting function is only a function of when, I guess, when you report in your formulation. But I wonder if the reporting function is not a function of two periods, of the period when it is reported and the period about which I report. And I wonder why we should suspect that the difference between reporting this year about this year and reporting this year about a year ago should be the same function. And on the other hand, reporting today about today and reporting a year ago today about a year ago today are different reporting functions. It seems to me, I mean, maybe we have evidence, but otherwise I just don't see how, you know, it seems like the subscripts solve the problem, but you know, you just move things around, right?
Okay. So it might be that it's a pure kind of, let's say, technicality, but let's see. So our interpretation of this would be that the reporting function is allowed to change every year for each and every individual. So you're not imposing that you use the same reporting function this year to answer exactly the same question as last year, which I thought you were kind of implying, because that's what we meant by subscript T. So the reporting function used to compare today and last year can change from this year to next year, and that's okay.
So let me repeat, maybe I didn't say it. The reporting function here is you have the same reporting function for a given time when you answer questions. And it doesn't matter what the timing of the object of the questions are.
Okay, Okay, sorry. Yes. So
I think that's a
that's
big
because
assumption.
we didn't look at that.
You know, that's a big assumption because I report about today very differently than I report about last year. I mean, for one thing, the things I remember about last year are very different than the things I remember about today, and probably in systematic ways, etc.
Yes, but well, I try again. So to check whether I've understood you. Of course, kind of this reporting function captures already that we're comparing 2 points in time, and assuming that kind of the way you treat stuff today and last year does not systematically change too much over time. But even then, I guess it's fine. We are not implying that if you change the time scale, so if you ask them to look 2 years or 5 years back, that would still be the same thing. That's not what we mean. But the thing is that there is only one reporting function, namely the one for that question. That's what we mean. Of course, if you change the question, it's a different one.
No, but
we also allow it to change over time.
So that's my question. When you say there is one reporting function per question,
yep.
What do you
mean? That's our interpretation.
So, yeah, but what do you mean by per question? How satisfied are you with your life this year, and how satisfied were you with your life last year? These are not the same question.
No. The question is, has your life improved or deteriorated? So the question is the comparison.
But to answer this comparison, I have to implicitly answer first 2 questions today, right?
No.
How do I know if it improved or not? I think about how it is today and how it was then as I recall it now, and then I report the sign.
Yes, so the important is we don't ask them whether they felt happier last year than they feel now, or whether they felt more satisfied. We ask them that, given who they are today and what they care about, would they rather be in the situation they've been last year?
No, I understand all of that. I'm just saying that what they recall of last year and what they recall of today are different things.
Yes, yes, that's...
Okay, so I just don't see... okay, so maybe I'm missing something big here. I just don't see how this is more attractive than... It seems to me like you push the problem to a different part of the function, that's all. But anyway, we can talk about it later.
So that yes and no. So I think, well, if recollection of kind of my situation last year is equally bad than my recollection of my reporting function last year for the level measure, you're right. We hope people are better able to recall what their life was last year than they are able to record the reporting function for the level measure they used last year. That's the underlying assumption. And if that doesn't hold, there's nothing gained.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies.
Okay,
Yes.
so 2 more questions. So the first one is from Katya.
Yeah, just to quickly follow up on the previous questions about the reporting function. Wouldn't we want there to be no subscript at all for interpersonal comparison? So wouldn't like we in an ideal universe want it to be no I and no T, as in I report today the same as tomorrow, the same as you report today and tomorrow? Isn't that kind of an assumption that we need if we want to compare people or the same person across time?
So that would be nice. I agree. I don't think that it's realistic to really assume that they are exactly the same. But as I do agree that we have to assume some degree of consistency, so that the meaning of what is better and what is worse is not too different. But yeah,
if I may, we simply hope that they are weekly measuring the same thing, so that the threshold between saying there's no change versus there is a positive change, that might change over time, but that if we think it is weekly better than last year, then all people would use either saying there is no change or say there has been an improvement, so that they are at least weekly using the same reporting function and not tell us that it has become worse over time, even though they don't feel so. So we hope that this concept of better, worse, and no change is more universally understandable and therefore leads to the same reporting functions or more closely to similar reporting functions.
I agree, but to be honest, I think, or econometrically, we don't yet use the weekly one, but we could, of course. So at the moment, a 0 and a 1 is still a difference. But of course, you could treat zeros the same as, or you could ignore the zeros essentially. But at the moment, we don't do that. But yes, I think in the weak sense, I think the result is, or the assumption is less problematic.
I see. Thank you.
Okay, so last question is from Christopher.
Hi. First of all, I just want to say I think this is really important work. Congratulations. And then let me start with a maybe not very intellectual introspection. You know, during your talk, my first thought was, well, if I want to do my best evaluation of whether life has improved, I know exactly what I will do. I will need to go and look at my diary and see the quantitative measure I wrote down for my life satisfaction a year ago. And that is the only thing I'm going to believe. If I instead introspect and say, well, you know, how was life back then? I will not trust myself. And I'm now actually thinking, even after your talk, that's probably still my instinct. Now, the punchline in your talk, I think, is that these coefficients are predictive and more strongly than life satisfaction. And in fact, you know, I think it's relevant to a lot of discussions that have come up already in this group is the fact that we see, you know, coherent relationships between life circumstances and these measures sort of jump over a lot of potential principled objections. But then now I'm thinking, you know, if we ask people what is going to be, you know, how happy are you going to be a year from now under these different possible future circumstances? People get it wrong. What they do is focus on certain aspects of life that are very visible and maybe measurable. And so there's plenty of, you know, literature on this kind of focusing mistake, in that for instance, we underestimate the importance and also stability, but the importance of our social interactions and a lot of sort of more mundane aspects of life. And we overemphasize things about, will I have moved to this city? I think is fantastic. Will I have gotten this job or promotion, or what happened to my income? And so I wonder whether the strong effects you see stand up to a broader set of life changes. So does this ranking measure also show that changes to our quality of, well, you have marriage in there, but that's also quite visible. But anyway, some of these other things that are strong in life satisfaction literature that measure our social context and so on, those things also you know, come out strong in the data? Or are we partly seeing here the fact that I make mistakes on the same kind of things that are likely to have been measured and easily accessible in your data? I make mistakes on focusing on the same things that are accessible in your data. Okay, I hope that.
So
yeah,
I think
with very exciting.
With respect to, I think, kind of social relations, I think Sonja has done some more analysis that I can't kind of fully recollect because she's done it on her own. So Sonja, if that's right, would you want to answer that question?
Well, so I don't recollect the whole the exact details, but what I remember is that if you could go to the results that you showed, Grisha.
Just a second.
Is that I mean, of course, social interaction is important, and there will be so something that we could include was to look at marriage or something like that. But what was really interesting is that the change in sign, maybe one back, if you could. so here we have the level measure, and so in this one, change in the financial situation, that here you would have a change in what happens, the change from today to last year. So if there was an improvement in my financial situation, I would also have an improvement in my levels, and I would also have an improvement in my ranking. So we agree on what happens from last period to this period, but we don't agree that much on what happens in the lagged one. So there is a tendency in the level measure to go back to adapt to, and what we think is that with the level we cannot measure increases over time. So that if we want to, sorry, I forgot what I wanted to.
No, because I originally thought kind of you wanted to talk about results that are not on this set of slides that you've done separately, because I thought you were looking at social other social relations, but I have only vague memories on that. But on a different level, so I agree with some of the worries you have. I don't agree that I believe that you would believe your number because you care deeply about those numbers. I'm more worried about the average survey participant from a representative sample, that their numbers really kind of are as good as if you would answer that question. And I fully agree with the diary, but of course the number is not a diary entry. And that essentially comes back to the question, how much effort do we want to spend in figuring out? And of course, it's much less effort to write down a number than to write and read a diary in a sense of explaining what my life kind of felt like.
Okay, Grisha, yeah, thank you for your presentation and for answering all the questions.